Two Friends, a short story by Guy de Maupassant. Besieged Paris was in the throes of famine. Even the sparrows on the roofs and the rats in the sewers were growing scarce. People were eating anything they could get. As Monsieur Morisseau, watchmaker by profession and idler for the nonce, was strolling along the boulevard one bright January morning, his hands in his trousers pockets and stomach empty, he suddenly came face to face with an acquaintance, Monsieur Sauvage, a fishing chum. Before the war broke out, Morisseau had been in the habit, every Sunday morning, of setting forth with a bamboo rod in his hand and a tin box on his back. He took the Argenteuil train, got out at Colombes, and walked thence to the Île Marante. The moment he arrived at this place of his dreams, he began fishing, and fished till nightfall. Every Sunday he met in this very spot Monsieur Sauvage, a stout, jolly little man, a draper in the Rue Notre-Dame de Lorette, and also an ardent fisherman. They often spent half the day side by side, rod in hand and feet dangling over the water, and a warm friendship had sprung up between the two. Some days they did not speak, at other times they chatted, but they understood each other perfectly without the aid of words, having similar tastes and feelings. In the spring, about 10 o'clock in the morning, when the early sun caused a light mist to float on the water and gently warmed the backs of the two enthusiastic anglers, Morisseau would occasionally remark to his neighbor, "My, but it's pleasant here." To which the other would reply, "I can't imagine anything better." And these few words sufficed to make them understand and appreciate each other. In the autumn, toward the close of day, when the setting sun shed a blood-red glow over the western sky, and the reflection of the crimson clouds tinged the whole river with red, brought a glow to the faces of the two friends, and gilded the trees, whose leaves were already turning at the first chill touch of winter, Monsieur Sauvage would sometimes smile at Morisseau and say, "What a glorious spectacle!" And Morisseau would answer, without taking his eyes from his float, "This is much better than the boulevard, isn't it?" As soon as they recognized each other, they shook hands cordially, affected at the thought of meeting under such changed circumstances. Monsieur Sauvage, with a sigh, murmured, "These are sad times." Morisseau shook his head mournfully. "And such weather! This is the first fine day of the year." The sky was, in fact, of a bright, cloudless blue. They walked along, side by side, reflective and sad. "And to think of the fishing," said Morisseau. "What good times we used to have." "When shall we be able to fish again?" asked Monsieur Sauvage. They entered a small café and took an absinthe together, then resumed their walk along the pavement. Morisseau stopped suddenly. "Shall we have another absinthe?" he said. "If you like," agreed Monsieur Sauvage. And they entered another wine shop. They were quite unsteady when they came out, owing to the effect of the alcohol on their empty stomachs. It was a fine, mild day, and a gentle breeze fanned their faces. The fresh air completed the effect of the alcohol on Monsieur Sauvage. He stopped suddenly, saying, "Suppose we go there." "Where?" "Fishing." "But where?" "Why, to the old place. The French outposts are close to Colombes. I know Colonel Dumoulin, and we shall easily get leave to pass." Morisseau trembled with desire. "Very well, I agree." And they separated to fetch their rods and lines. An hour later, they were walking side by side on the high road. Presently, they reached the villa occupied by the colonel. He smiled at their request and granted it. They resumed their walk, furnished with a password. Soon they left the outpost behind them, made their way through deserted Colombes, and found themselves on the outskirts of the small vineyards which border the Seine. It was about 11 o'clock. Before them lay the village of Argenteuil, apparently lifeless. The heights of Orgemont and Sanois dominated the landscape. The great plain, extending as far as Nanterre, was empty, quite empty, a waste of dun-colored soil and bare cherry trees. Monsieur Sauvage, pointing to the heights, murmured, "The Prussians are up yonder." And the sight of the deserted country filled the two friends with vague misgivings. The Prussians! They had never seen them as yet, but they had felt their presence in the neighborhood of Paris for months past, ruining France, pillaging, massacring, starving them, and a kind of superstitious terror mingled with the hatred they already felt toward this unknown, victorious nation. "Suppose we were to meet any of them," said Morisot. "We'd offer them some fish," replied Monsieur Sauvage, with that Parisian light-heartedness which nothing can wholly quench. Still, they hesitated to show themselves in the open country, overawed by the utter silence which reigned around them. At last, Monsieur Sauvage said boldly, "Come, we'll make a start. Only let us be careful." And they made their way through one of the vineyards, bent double, creeping along beneath the cover afforded by the vines, with eye and ear alert. A strip of bare ground remained to be crossed before they could gain the river-bank. They ran across this, and as soon as they were at the water's edge, concealed themselves among the dry reeds. Morisot placed his ear to the ground to ascertain, if possible, whether footsteps were coming their way. He heard nothing. They seemed to be utterly alone. Their confidence was restored, and they began to fish. Before them, the deserted Ile Marante hid them from the farther shore. The little restaurant was closed and looked as if it had been deserted for years. Monsieur Sauvage caught the first gudgeon, Monsieur Morisot the second, and almost every moment one or other raised his line with a little glittering, silvery fish wriggling at the end. They were having excellent sport. They slipped their catch gently into a close-meshed bag lying at their feet. They were filled with joy, the joy of once more indulging in a pastime of which they had long been deprived. The sun poured its rays on their backs. They no longer heard anything or thought of anything. They ignored the rest of the world. They were fishing. But suddenly, a rumbling sound, which seemed to come from the bowels of the earth, shook the ground beneath them. The cannon were resuming their thunder. Morisot turned his head and could see toward the left, beyond the banks of the river, the formidable outline of Mont Valérien, from whose summit arose a white puff of smoke. The next instant, a second puff followed the first, and in a few moments a fresh detonation made the earth tremble. Others followed, and minute by minute the mountain gave forth its deadly breath and a white puff of smoke, which rose slowly into the peaceful heaven and floated above the summit of the cliff. Monsieur Sauvage shrugged his shoulders. "They are at it again," he said. Morisot, who was anxiously watching his float bobbing up and down, was suddenly seized with the angry impatience of a peaceful man toward the madmen who were firing thus, and remarked indignantly, "What fools they are to kill one another like that!" "They're worse than animals," replied Monsieur Sauvage. And Morisot, who had just caught a bleak, declared, "And to think that it will be just the same so long as there are governments." "The Republic would not have declared war," interposed Monsieur Sauvage. Morisot interrupted him. "Under a king we have foreign wars. Under a republic we have civil war." And the two began placidly discussing political problems with the sound common sense of peaceful, matter-of-fact citizens, agreeing on one point, that they would never be free. And Mont Valérien thundered ceaselessly, demolishing the houses of the French with its cannonballs, grinding lives of men to powder, destroying many a dream, many a cherished hope, many a prospective happiness, ruthlessly causing endless woe and suffering in the hearts of wives, of daughters, of mothers in other lands. "Such is life," declared Monsieur Sauvage. "Say, rather, such is death," replied Morisot, laughing. But they suddenly trembled with alarm at the sound of footsteps behind them, and turning round, they perceived close at hand 4 tall, bearded men, dressed after the manner of livery servants and wearing flat caps on their heads. They were covering the 2 anglers with their rifles. The rods slipped from their owner's grasp and floated away down the river. In the space of a few seconds they were seized, bound, thrown into a boat, and taken across to the Ile Marante. And behind the house they had thought deserted were about a score of German soldiers. A shaggy-looking giant, who was bestriding a chair and smoking a long clay pipe, addressed them in excellent French with the words, "Well, gentlemen, Have you had good luck with your fishing?" Then a soldier deposited at the officer's feet the bag full of fish which he had taken care to bring away. The Prussian smiled. "Not bad, I see. But we have something else to talk about. Listen to me and don't be alarmed. You must know that in my eyes you are two spies sent to reconnoiter me and my movements. Naturally, I capture you and I shoot you. You pretended to be fishing, the better to disguise your real errand. You have fallen into my hands and must take the consequences. Such is war. But as you came here through the outposts, you must have a password for your return. Tell me that password, and I will let you go." The two friends, pale as death, stood silently side by side, a slight fluttering of the hands alone betraying their emotion. "No one will ever know," continued the officer. "You will return peacefully to your homes, and the secret will disappear with you. If you refuse, it means death, instant death. Choose." They stood motionless, and did not open their lips. The Prussian, perfectly calm, went on, with hand outstretched toward the river. "Just think that in 5 minutes you will be at the bottom of that water. In 5 minutes. You have relations, I presume." Mont Valérien still thundered. The two fishermen remained silent. The German turned and gave an order in his own language. Then he moved his chair a little way off, that he might not be so near the prisoners, and a dozen men stepped forward, rifle in hand, and took up a position, 20 paces off. "I give you 1 minute," said the officer. "Not a second longer." Then he rose quickly, went over to the two Frenchmen, took Morisot by the arm, led him a short distance off, and said in a low voice, "Quick! The password! Your friend will know nothing. I will pretend to relent." Morisot answered not a word. Then the Prussian took Monsieur Sauvage aside in like manner, and made him the same proposal. Monsieur Sauvage made no reply. Again they stood side by side. The officer issued his orders. The soldiers raised their rifles. Then by chance Morisot's eyes fell on the bag full of gudgeon lying in the grass a few feet from him. A ray of sunlight made the still quivering fish glisten like silver, and Morisot's heart sank. Despite his efforts at self-control, his eyes filled with tears. "Goodbye, Monsieur Sauvage," he faltered. "Goodbye, Monsieur Morisot," replied Sauvage. They shook hands, trembling from head to foot with a dread beyond their mastery. The officer cried, "Fire!" The 12 shots were as one. Monsieur Sauvage fell forward instantaneously. Morisot, being the taller, swayed slightly and fell across his friend with face turned skyward and blood oozing from a rent in the breast of his coat. The German issued fresh orders. His men dispersed and presently returned with ropes and large stones, which they attached to the feet of the two friends. Then they carried them to the river bank. Mont Valérien, its summit now enshrouded in smoke, still continued to thunder. 2 soldiers took Morisot by the head and the feet. 2 others did the same with Sauvage. The bodies, swung lustily by strong hands, were cast to a distance, and describing a curve, fell feet foremost into the stream. The water splashed high, foamed, eddied, then grew calm. Tiny waves lapped the shore. A few streaks of blood flecked the surface of the river. The officer, calm throughout, remarked with grim humor, "It's the fish's turn now." Then he retraced his way to the house. Suddenly he caught sight of the net full of gudgeons lying forgotten in the grass. He picked it up, examined it, smiled, and called, "Wilhelm!" A white-aproned soldier responded to the summons, and the Prussian, tossing him the catch of the 2 murdered men, said, "Have these fish fried for me at once, while they are still alive. They'll make a tasty dish." Then he resumed his pipe.
The Little Cask, a short story by Guy de Maupassant. He was a tall man of 40 or thereabout, this Jules Chicot, the innkeeper of Spreville, with a red face and a round stomach, and said by those who knew him to be a smart businessman. He stopped his buggy in front of Mother Magloire's farmhouse and, hitching the horse to the gatepost, went in at the gate. Chicotte owned some land adjoining that of the old woman, which he had been coveting for a long while, and had tried in vain to buy a score of times, but she had always obstinately refused to part with it. "I was born here, and here I mean to die," was all she said. He found her peeling potatoes outside the farmhouse door. She was a woman of about 72, very thin, shriveled and wrinkled, almost dried up in fact, and much bent, but as active and untiring as a girl. Chicotte patted her on the back in a friendly fashion, and then sat down by her on a stool. "Well, mother, you are always pretty well and hearty, I am glad to see." "Nothing to complain of, considering, thank you. And how are you, Monsieur Chicot?" "Oh, pretty well, thank you, except a few rheumatic pains occasionally. Otherwise I have nothing to complain of." "So much the better." And she said no more, while Chicot watched her going on with her work. Her crooked, knotted fingers, hard as a lobster's claws, seized the tubers, which were lying in a pail, as if they had been a pair of pincers, and she peeled them rapidly, cutting off long strips of skin with an old knife which she held in the other hand, throwing the potatoes into the water as they were done. 3 daring fowls jumped one after the other into her lap, seized a bit of peel, and then ran away as fast as their legs would carry them with it in their beak. Chicotte seemed embarrassed, anxious, with something on the tip of his tongue which he could not say. At last he said hurriedly, "Listen, Mother Magloire. Well, what is it? You are quite sure that you do not want to sell your land?" "Certainly not. You may make up your mind to that." "What I have said, so don't refer to it again." "Very well. Only I think I know of an arrangement that might suit us both very well." "What is it?" "Just this. You shall sell it to me and keep it all the same. You don't understand. Very well. Then follow me in what I am going to say." The old woman left off peeling potatoes and looked at the innkeeper attentively from under her heavy eyebrows, and he went on, "Let me explain myself. Every month I will give you 150 francs. You understand me? Suppose, every month I will come and bring you 30 crowns, and it will not make the slightest difference in your life, not the very slightest. You will have your own home just as you have now, need not trouble yourself about me, and will owe me nothing. All you will have to do will be to take my money. Will that arrangement suit you?" He looked at her good-humouredly. One might almost have said benevolently, and the old woman returned his looks distrustfully, as if she suspected a trap, and said, "It seems all right as far as I am concerned, but it will not give you the farm." "Never mind about that," he said. "You may remain here as long as it pleases God Almighty to let you live. It will be your home. Only you will sign a deed before a lawyer making it over to me, after your death. You have no children, only nephews and nieces for whom you don't care a straw. Will that suit you? You will keep everything during your life, and I will give you the 30 crowns a month. It is pure gain as far as you are concerned." The old woman was surprised, rather uneasy, but nevertheless very much tempted to agree, and answered, "I don't say that I will not agree to it, but I must think about it. Come back in a week, and we will talk it over again, and I will then give you my definite answer." And Chicot went off as happy as a king who had conquered an empire. Mother Magloire was thoughtful and did not sleep at all that night. In fact, for 4 days she was in a fever of hesitation. She suspected that there was something underneath the offer which was not to her advantage. But then the thought of 30 crowns a month, of all those coins clinking in her apron, falling to her, as it were, from the skies, without her doing anything for it, aroused her covetousness. She went to the notary and told him about it. He advised her to accept Chicot's offer, but said she ought to ask for an annuity of 50 instead of 30, as her farm was worth 60,000 francs at the lowest calculation. "If you live for 15 years longer," he said, "even then he will only have paid 45,000 francs for it." The old woman trembled with joy at this prospect of getting 50 crowns a month, but she was still suspicious, fearing some trick, and she remained a long time with the lawyer, asking questions, without being able to make up her mind to go. At last she gave him instructions to draw up the deed and returned home with her head in a whirl, just as if she had drunk 4 jugs of new cider. When Chico came again to receive her answer, she declared, after a lot of persuading, that she could not make up her mind to agree to his proposal, though she was all the time trembling, lest he should not consent to give the 50 crowns. But at last, when he grew urgent, she told him what she expected for her farm. He looked surprised and disappointed and refused. Then, in order to convince him, she began to talk about the probable duration of her life. "I am certainly not likely to live more than 5 or 6 years longer. I am nearly 73 and far from strong, even considering my age. The other evening I thought I was going to die and could hardly manage to crawl into bed." But Chicotte was not going to be taken in. "Come, come, old lady, you are as strong as the church tower, and will live till you are 100 at least. You will no doubt see me put underground first." The whole day was spent in discussing the money, and as the old woman would not give in, the innkeeper consented to give the 50 crowns, and she insisted upon having 10 crowns over and above to strike the bargain. 3 years passed, and the old dame did not seem to have grown a day older. Chicotte was in despair, and it seemed to him as if he had been paying that annuity for 50 years, that he had been taken in, done, ruined. From time to time he went to see the old lady, just as one goes in July to see when the harvest is likely to begin. She always met him with a cunning look, and one might have supposed that she was congratulating herself on the trick she had played him. Seeing how well and hearty she seemed, he very soon got into his buggy again, growling to himself, "Will you never die, you old hag?" He did not know what to do, and he felt inclined to strangle her when he saw her. He hated her with a ferocious, cunning hatred, the hatred of a peasant who has been robbed, and began to cast about for some means of getting rid of her. One day he came to see her again, rubbing his hands as he did the first time he proposed the bargain, and after having chatted for a few minutes, he said, "Why do you never come and have a bit of dinner at my place when you are in Spreville? The people are talking about it and saying we are not on friendly terms, and that pains me. You know it will cost you nothing if you come, for I don't look at the price of a dinner. Come whenever you feel inclined. I shall be very glad to see you." Old Mother Magloire did not need to be asked twice, and the next day but one, as she had to go to the town in any case. It being market day, she let her man drive her to Chicot's place, where the buggy was put in the barn while she went into the house to get her dinner. The innkeeper was delighted and treated her like a lady, giving her roast fowl, black pudding, leg of mutton and bacon and cabbage. But she ate next to nothing. She had always been a small eater, and had generally lived on a little soup and a crust of bread and butter. Chicotte was disappointed and pressed her to eat more, but she refused, and she would drink little and declined coffee. So he asked her, "But surely you will take a little drop of brandy or liqueur?" "Well, as to that, I don't know that I will refuse." Whereupon he shouted out, "Rosalie, bring the superfine brandy, the special, you know." The servant appeared, carrying a long bottle ornamented with a paper vine leaf, and he filled 2 liqueur glasses. "Just try that. You will find it first rate." The good woman drank it slowly in sips, so as to make the pleasure last all the longer, and when she had finished her glass, she said, "Oh, yes, that is first rate." Almost before she had said it, Chicot had poured her out another glassful. She wished to refuse, but it was too late, and she drank it very slowly, as she had done the first, and he asked her to have a third. She objected, but he persisted. "It is as mild as milk, you know. I can drink 10 or a dozen glasses without any ill effects. It goes down like sugar and does not go to the head. One would think that it evaporated on the tongue. It is the most wholesome thing you can drink." She took it, for she really enjoyed it, but she left half the glass. Then Chicot, in an excess of generosity, said, "Look here, as it is so much to your taste, I will give you a small keg of it, just to show that you and I are still excellent friends." So she took one away with her, feeling slightly overcome by the effects of what she had drunk. The next day, the innkeeper drove into her yard and took a little iron-hooped keg out of his gig. He insisted on her tasting the contents to make sure it was the same delicious article, and when they had each of them drunk 3 more glasses, he said as he was going away, "Well, you know when it is all gone, there is more left. Don't be modest, for I shall not mind. The sooner it is finished, the better pleased I shall be." 4 days later, he came again. The old woman was outside her door cutting up the bread for her soup. He went up to her and put his face close to hers so that he might smell her breath, and when he smelt the alcohol, he felt pleased. "I suppose you will give me a glass of the special," he said. And they had 3 glasses each. Soon, however, it began to be whispered abroad that Mother Magloire was in the habit of getting drunk all by herself. She was picked up in her kitchen, then in her yard, then in the roads in the neighborhood, and she was often brought home like a log. The innkeeper did not go near her any more, and when people spoke to him about her, he used to say, putting on a distressed look, "It is a great pity that she should have taken to drink at her age. But when people get old, there is no remedy. It will be the death of her in the long run." And it certainly was the death of her. She died the next winter. About Christmas time she fell down, unconscious, in the snow, and was found dead the next morning. And when Chico came in for the farm, he said it was very stupid of her. If she had not taken to drink, she would probably have lived 10 years longer.